This is a test. Why did God make me? Do you remember that question from the old Baltimore Catechism? Yeah, don't pretend you're too young to know what that was. I mean, otherwise we're going to go back to the penitential rite and we'll do another, Why did God make me? God made me to know, you can say this with me if you remember. God made me to know him, love him, and serve him in this world, and to be happy with him in the next. Congratulations, you passed. When we grew up, any good Catholic knew that. Another one, matter of fact, the deacon tested me last night. What is a sacrament? I won't go into those, but you just sort of, they're in there, and you can't get them out, those answers. Well, if any good Catholic of our generation knew those Baltimore Catechism questions and answers, any good Jew at the time of Jesus knew the answer to the Pharisees' question. What is the greatest commandment of the law? Any Jew worth anything, if they'd ever been near a synagogue or a temple, knew the answer to that question. Because the greatest law in the law of Moses is what they call the Shema Israel. It's found in the book of Deuteronomy, if you want to dig out your Bibles and look for it. The Shema Israel says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Therefore you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." To this day, religious Jews will say that, mumble those words over and over in the course of a day, much like we as Catholics might make the sign of the cross or say the Hail Mary or the Our Father. They knew what the Shema Israel was. They knew what the greatest law was. That was not a difficult question. It's what Jesus says next that defines both him and his ministry. Because he says, and the second is like it, by the way. He says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, Jesus didn't just make up that commandment. That was already in the Jewish law, but it was way down there. By the time Jesus came around, there were about 620 precepts of the law, different, because as time went on, they went from the 10 Commandments, which were pretty simple, but then people wanted clarification, like how badly can you beat somebody else before you break the commandment of you shall not kill, or, something like. And so they wanted to know exactly what they had to do, and so the rabbis, the scholars of the law would keep clarifying, well, this is what that means, Remember to keep holy the Sabbath. Well, how far can I walk on the Sabbath? Well, you can only walk this far. What if my donkey falls into a pit? Well, you can't pick him up. All of these things. And so, love your neighbor as yourself. It's in the book of Leviticus, but it was sort of down there a bit. But what Jesus does is lift this law out of obscurity, and he puts it next to what every Jew there knew was the most important law. Jesus is telling the people, this will define his ministry. 2 laws: love God with everything you got, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus leaves no doubt in anybody's mind. It's not one or the other. You can't pick. As members of God's kingdom, we must do both. We must love God. We also must love our neighbor, because our neighbor, whether we like them or not, is a son or a daughter of God, made in God's image. Might be hard sometimes to see that image, but he made them that way. So, here's the deal. If you come to church and you pray devoutly to God, and then you leave church and you cut people off getting out of the parking lot, if you leave church and treat your spouse, your parents, your kids, your neighbors, the people you disagree with, the people who don't share your political views, if you treat them poorly, if you make fun of them, if you ridicule them, if you judge them, or if you hate them, you're missing the point. This approach simply won't cut it with God. We can't profess love for God on the one hand. We can't do all of our devotions, say multiple rosaries every day. We can act like we are the sole defenders of everything the church teaches, and then savage the name and reputation of anyone with whom we don't agree. Politicians have brought this to an art form. Unfortunately, it's also filtered down into the way we treat other people. You may disagree with this, but as I've reflected on it, I don't think there's been a time in our country since the Civil War when we have been so divided, when we can't even talk to each other, when we might even hate each other. I know there was a lot of problems during the Vietnam War, but that seemed to be more concentrated in those who had strong feelings for or against it. Here, it's just everybody's part of it. And we can't even talk to each other. And when we do, what we say is not worth saying. This is filtered down to all of us. We have all been affected. And it seems like so much as you listen to people, you read the letters to the editor in The Independent, my God, we can't even be civil to one another. There is so much venom in our speech, collectively. Now, I know you would never do this, but for the rest of those people out there, it's a sad, I think, it's a sad indictment of our behavior when recently the rec centers of Sun City West have launched a Be Kind campaign. Now, I don't know if you're aware of it, but if you go to any of the rec centers, if you go to the library or different places, they have these little buttons. I have one here, but I didn't think it would be cool if I put it on. But they have these things, be kind. And they're trying to get people to be aware that there's no place in our relationships for aggressive behavior, aggressive language, for saying things to each other that are truly harmful and hurtful. I'm really glad they started this campaign. I only wish that we Christians had thought of it first, but I think we were too busy loving God. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing that we didn't think of it, but we can still get on the bandwagon. Jesus' law is simple. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's clear, not simple. Love God with everything you got, and love your neighbor as yourself. You can't pick and choose. If you look at the Christian life, love of God, love of neighbor, these are the dynamic duo of our Christianity.